Welcome to Tree Book Passages, a podcast that showcases quotes from our favorite tree books to springboard conversations about trees, forests, and people. I'm Doug Still, host of This Old Tree podcast.
And I'm Georgia Silvera Seamans, host of Your Bird Story podcast.
So today we are reading passages from The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on one American street by Mike Tidwell. Georgia, you proposed this book. Could you tell us what it's about?
Okay, I'll start with the title, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, and be really honest with listeners. I thought this book would be a work of fiction. And it is very much far from a book of fiction. I suppose if you are a denier of climate change, you could read this as a book of fiction, but this is in fact Mike Tidwell's experience of tree decline and death on his block. And as the subtitle hints, the trees are dying because of climate change. I mean, the subtitle also talks about hope, and we do find hope in this book through several characters. The author himself, who has a long career in climate activism, but also chooses to highlight members of his community and their own activism and advocacy for trees on their block and in the city in which he lives. I see the hope, but I think one thing that this book does remarkably well is to localize climate change.
Exactly.
To ground it in an urban context in a way that I haven't seen before in, I guess you would call it popular or pop culture books. I mean, you could find this in scholarly literature. You could find this, to be honest, I just haven't read something like this before where cities are really front and center when talking about the impacts of climate change on trees.
And it's a lovely idea to look at one's own block and understand that changes occurring right outside your front door are not anomalies, that it's tied to the local environment.
So there is a tradition of writing about the decline and death of trees in cities. And that legacy has been really tied to diseases and pests. So whether it's the American chestnut, the American elm, our maples, our ashes, there have been books that have talked about the impact of the loss of these species in cities and towns. And climate change is sort of the next, or one of the next major impacts to trees and cities.
So would you like to read the passage that you've chosen?
I would love to. But first came the winter warmth. It did more than disrupt the trees' reproductive schedules. It scrambled the core metabolism of many trees, including oaks, creating life-threatening conditions for some. In the past few years, many of us in Tacoma Park had noticed that among a growing number of trees that survived the soaked ground of 2018 and the subsequent attack of ambrosia beetles, there was a new and strange syndrome emerging characterized by leafless fingertips. At the top of the canopies, the branches were bare in summer, no leaves at all for their last 3 or 4 feet of growth. This created the disturbing look of bony fingers reaching up through the canopy. Several arborists told me the same thing. We think the erratic winters are contributing to this. Like most trees, oaks need to sleep in winter. They go dormant. To keep their branches from freezing in the cold weather, the trees convert the starch in their branches to an extra sugary sap. It serves as an antifreeze. Plus, the branches expel water from their living cells, reducing the chance of freezing. But when winter turns prematurely warm in mid-season, as now happens so frequently, the trees start to wake up and pump water into their extremities, thinking spring is arriving and it's almost time to make leaves again. But soon, As the roller coaster weather turns back to freezing, the branches are suddenly vulnerable and less protected. Their defense is diluted. Cells in the branch tips start to freeze and die. If it continues for too long and the tree loses 30% or more of its spring foliage, it will likely die. Was this, I wondered, what was happening to my pin oak? So that's the passage, and it has so much emotional valence. Some of the language that the author chooses to use to describe the trees in the passage I selected really personalizes the trees, sort of humanizes them. The idea of fingertips and trees going to sleep and then waking up, I think creates a connection with trees, and I think sort of helps us have a greater empathy towards what's happening to trees. If you are not a person who typically thinks about how trees might react to these erratic changes in temperature, I think this passage is something that can help you imagine that.
Great one. And I like that he's moving beyond just observing what's happening, but trying to figure out why. My quote is from chapter 6, The End of Fire, and it's about detecting gas leaks. Here's how it goes. I don't know what I expected, but this wasn't it. I was standing in the middle of a busy Tacoma Park street, traffic coming both ways, while my friend Barbara Briggs knelt on the asphalt, trying to detect a gas leak. Just go around, I shouted to drivers glaring back at me. Then Barbara, with a special measuring gadget in her hand, blurted out the results above the whiz of cars. Hazard level, she said. We've got hazard level 2 here for explosive risk. Look at these numbers. It's a big leak. I had not invited Barbara to my neighborhood to get myself blown up. I just wanted to know if there were small leaks of gas on Willow Avenue. It was a growing national problem, invisible, chronic leaks of methane gas, especially in older neighborhoods. Collectively, they constituted a huge climate and public safety risk, and it's another reason why we can't ever reverse course in the switch to clean energy. So there we were at the end of Willow, near the DC border, standing actually in the middle of the busy street, Carroll Avenue, where a so-called gas cap existed. It's a kind of manhole cover used by the local utility, Washington Gas, to access the gas main. And it was literally spewing invisible methane, a heat-trapping gas 80 times more powerful than CO2 when measured over a 20-year period. This odd adventure began a few days earlier when I mentioned to Barbara by phone that 2 of the willow oaks on my block were really sick. Are those trees along the street curb? She asked. You know, it might not be climate change. Gas leaks can kill trees too. Let me come check it out. Maybe only once have I seen a gas leak this high, coming from the ground like this and sustained for a whole block. It's highly unusual. Only once, I said? So it's bad? Sometimes I'll see a spike of 8 or 9 parts per million in one spot, but not on and on like this block. It's not an explosion risk, but a pipe definitely appears to be leaking down there at a constant rate, and it's finding its way up in lots of cracks in the curb and soil and the sidewalk. Very unusual. I don't think you can prove it's killing your trees here, but it certainly doesn't help. It's a problem for any tree trying to grow. The chemistry is simple. The leaking gas displaces oxygen in the soil, drying out the ground and eventually suffocating the roots if sustained at a sufficient level. Hundreds of thousands of urban trees likely die this way each year in the U.S. But good luck getting Washington Gas to fix that, Barbara said. A few weeks later, in early June, on another hazy day, a tree removal crew came to Willow Avenue to cut down Dorothy's willow oak across the street and haul it away. After 80 years of life, it took 87 minutes for the crew to chainsaw it to the ground and stack it into a truck. I timed them. A few days later, at dusk, Dorothy and I held a quiet ceremony for the tree. We placed a candle on the ground where even the stump was now gone, ground to sawdust. Per a tradition I learned in Africa, we poured strong spirits, I brought some vodka, onto the ground, marking all 4 directions of the afterworld. north, south, east, west. Our tree had passed through the great door, across the threshold to the other side.
Doug, you are an active arborist. Can you talk about your experience with the impacts of gas leaks on trees?
Yeah, this passage spoke to me because they're doing citizen science on their block and sort of tapping into this national idea or movement that gas could be killing trees. And I've had that experience as city forester in Providence, where a number of trees were dying and we didn't know why. And there was a local person that was also testing for gas, prevalence of gas in the soil in different locations. I don't know how his report finally finalized, but he was looking at gas leaks in Providence, but also in other cities around New England. And nothing can kill a tree faster than displacing the oxygen in the soil and having the entire tree will die.
Hmm.
So I think this passage encapsulates what this book is about, trying to understand why trees were dying on the street and what the problems are and possibly what they could do to help the tree survive.
Gosh, the litany of problems that trees and cities face just seems to be getting longer. And I think perhaps the hope in the book is that there are people who are absolute tree lovers and tree huggers in cities and are incredibly consistent and persistent advocates for them. As someone who lives in the Northeast, I can't imagine living in a treeless city.
And I know lots of citizen advocates and activists. So I have hope too, like this author.
And listeners, if you like what you've heard, you can purchase The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue by Mike Tidwell using the affiliate link on this page. 10% goes to our efforts, and 10% goes to support local bookstores. Thanks for joining us on Tree Book Passages. See you next time.
And keep reading.